Hello, everyone, and welcome to another broadcast from the MRMIA Group. My name is Mark LaPrince. I'll be your host, and this is the Model Risk Managers International Association. And today we have another episode in our series of interviewing the board members of MRMIA. Today we have the president, Dr. Joseph Breeden. And he's going to be here today
Thank you.
talking to us a little bit about the history of the MRMIA Association, as well as its current charter today. So, Joe, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Thank you, Mark. Um, I've been working in credit risk modeling for loans, consumer and commercial, for about 25 years now. And originally a physicist, but I was hired into a think tank that was started by Citibank jointly with Los Alamos National Laboratory. So because of that, that's why I live in Santa Fe, New Mexico. So out enjoying the fall weather. But from there, my very first assignments were to go to countries in crisis. So back in 95, I was working in South America. 97, 98, I was working in Southeast Asia, Thailand, Malaysia, Indonesia, Singapore. And then that theme has kind of continued. That's been my career. So the 2001 recession, the 2003 Hong Kong SARS recession, um, doing training for the Greek banks during the Greek debt crisis. Um, of course, the 2009 recession, and that was global as well. So working with banks here and other places. And then this year with COVID-19, there were some echoes of the past with Hong Kong in 2003, but faint echoes, I would say. This has been quite dramatically different than that. So that's my background. And, the that background in model development, I really think of myself more as an analyst, a modeler.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but anybody who does model development these days has to spend a lot of effort on validation and model risk in general. And that's how I came to know MRMIA is through those activities.
That's excellent. That's excellent. So this kind of delves into what I wanted to talk about next. Was If you could give us a brief overview of the history of the MRMIA Association, how it came about, who was its founder, and kind of when you found it.
Certainly. I think the original idea behind MRMIA was about 3 years ago, which would be 2017, and that was Dennis Bennett. He was head of model risk management for FHLB New York, and I met him around that time as he reached out to me because of some of the modeling publications and work I've done, and we became friends. Dennis was a great guy. Um, so he founded MRMIA in 2018, beginning of the year. Um, Unfortunately, he wasn't able to be with it very long. He unexpectedly passed. And uh, at that time, I was his primary cheerleader. I was his one official board member, secretary of the board, so I could co sign the documents. So I never expected to be president of MRMIA. But Dennis had a great idea here. And partly out of respect for Dennis and partly just in appreciation of his ideas, I thought, yeah, let's try to make this real. And so we took his starting point and contacted others in the industry, and we've had a very strong response to the idea of having an international collaborative group that could work on these ideas.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. So, what is the MRMIA Association for? What is its current charter, and where are you trying to take the association today?
Well, that has evolved a bit. I think Dennis had a broad vision of training courses and certifications and a lot of support of model risk experts, and that's a good vision. Um, we wanted to start with something that was really lacking, we thought, in the industry. And from our perspective, and this is myself and our founding board, and I can mention quickly our board members today are Tom Dolan, Alan Forrest, and Peter Krell. And as we discussed this question, we felt like the thing to focus on first um, is what we're calling work groups. And the idea here is that we have guidance from regulators, but it is intentionally conceptual. Vague sounds like a negative term, but it's vague by design because you're supposed to figure out what this means for yourself. Well, that's fine. Um, but then you've got auditors and others who have a one-sided risk. Their risk is that they don't find everything that might be wrong with a model. And that one-sided risk incents them to ask for more and more, even if it's not clearly worth the cost and effort to produce it. Now, that doesn't mean that they all ask for things they shouldn't ask for. It just means that there is this bias, and some will naturally fall into that trap. So the third group here are the financial institutions, which individually don't have a lot of clout. And in fact, I think we all see individually, they don't want to ruffle feathers. They don't want to upset their examiner. They don't want to upset their auditor. So they try to comply. They don't push back a lot. But really, there should be a voice in this conversation which is focused on cost benefit.
Mm-hmm.
What is appropriate to do as far as validation and model risk management? What's worth the cost? Some things you can do, there are lots of academic papers out there, lots of great theory on things you could do, but is it really mature?
Mm-hmm.
Is it worth the cost today? Or is it something just to keep an eye on for the future? And we don't want to leave that decision up to an individual examiner or an individual auditor. We want to give them what we think collectively is a good idea. So right now, what we want to focus on with MRMIA is putting out guidance. And I shouldn't use the word guidance. That's what regulators do. Let's say recommendations on best practices.
Right.
What does this group of professionals from financial institutions think best practice looks like? And so they're not going to be speaking on behalf of their institutions individually. Nobody wants to sign up for that individually as an institution. I get that.
Mm-hmm.
But as experts in the field who work at important institutions, we're coming together to write these white papers, these documents that collect best practice. And so we have a collection of different work groups who focus on different areas.
Mm-hmm.
So that's our main focus.
So that's fantastic. I really believe that there needs to be a group out there that's helping standardize some of these best practices, because as I go to many MRM events, MRMIA or otherwise, you often find a lot of this idea sharing is really geared toward just getting people to bring ideas forward, share their thoughts and ideas, because there is no real standard, right? There's no kind of flag in the ground yet. So walk me through some of the standards and some of the white papers that MRMIA is working on today. Where are you trying to create standards today, and what's kind of on the horizon?
Certainly. Well, we have 4 board members at this point, and so in our meeting we said, well, let's each take one.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought I would focus on CECL because I do a lot of work on CECL, but this was at the beginning of the year, and that was kind of overrun by COVID-19. We said that's a critical topic, so I said, all right, I'm going to switch. So I brought together a group to focus on the impacts of COVID-19 on model risk management. Then we've got Peter Krell, who works for DZ Bank in Frankfurt, and he is working on model risk management for AI and machine learning models. And there again, it's important to look at, um, it's such an evolving topic. What do we know? How should we look at model risk for those? What is still research and not ready for prime time? Um, and what are the risks, especially with those kinds of models?
Right.
Then we have Alan Forrest, who works at Virgin Money UK and head of model risk. And Alan is working on quantifying model risk. So if you think about a model inventory,
Mm-hmm.
um, how do you quantify the risk either individually or collectively across those models? And there, broadly speaking, you can take a scorecard approach where you use a judgmental assessment of each model so that you can report back to executive committee of here's how we look, here's our scorecard for our models, and here's our score. And they want to know, are we getting better or worse?
Mm-hmm.
And then we have Tom Dolan, who's heading a group on right sizing model risk management. Now, every one of these groups is important, but I think right sizing model risk management is really greenfield.
Yeah.
It's critical, but it's barely discussed. And what I mean by that is if you look at, big banks, that's where the guidance usually comes first. That's where the auditors are asking for the most, and it's kind of obvious. What should you do? You should do everything.
Right.
But when you get to the smaller regional banks, community banks, credit unions, what should they be doing? They can't do what the others do. They may not even have in-house developers. This may be more about how do you validate and manage model risk on vendor models.
Mm-hmm.
So Tom's work group does talk a lot about vendor models. It talks about what's appropriate model risk management for a small institution, especially from an organizational perspective. So those are our 4 work groups today. There will be others in the future. We will bring back that CECL work group perhaps next year. But I think one key factor here is that none of these are static efforts. Now, those who've joined the work groups, I'm sure they don't know that they may have signed up for an ongoing multi-year effort. In fact, we'll probably have people drop off and new people come on. But these have to be living documents. We may do an annual release of these as best practice changes. So now we're working on these today and making good progress across the board. In fact, surprisingly, we're pretty well synchronized in our efforts. My expectation is that around year end or the beginning of next year, we'll have these complete enough that we'll try to have a virtual conference, kind of a one-day event, where each of these work groups can present their ideas to the broader community. And this will be an opportunity for people to join MRMIA, join the conference, and listen, contribute. And these documents we want to have community feedback on. So what each of these work group committees produces is not a final word. This is a group of us getting together to put our best thoughts down, but there are a lot of other ideas that are out there. And so we hope to get a lot of feedback and go through revisions. And so release of version 1 for these white papers, maybe it's end of first quarter next year, something on that timeline, but the draft release will be coming soon.
Excellent. That's fantastic to hear. So to kind of wrap things up, I wanted to ask you another question for our viewers and some of our listeners here. What do professionals have to gain by joining the MRMIA group? What can we offer them?
Well, it is a good question. And right now, we do have some basic fees. This is not an organization with a big budget and big costs. We don't run that way. It's a nonprofit and no one's paid. But we'd like to cover our costs. So we are looking for members. And the first thing is that conference that I mentioned that we're going to have, the cost of membership will be the cost of admission for the conference, and it's not much. So immediately by joining, you'll be part of our conferences and you'll be a participant in contributing to these white papers. Basically, if you want to send your comments in and you want to download the draft documents, you're going to need to be a member so you can get access to that part of the website. But we're trying to keep these costs very low because we want people to join. This is not a money-making activity at all. So it's a very focused, low-budget type of organization, and on purpose, so that we can just focus on content and production.
That's fantastic here. Well, thank you so much, Joe. And to the rest of our listeners, make sure you tune in next time to our broadcast. Take care.
Thank you.